Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today, I'm joined by Tim Burke. He's the CEO over at Affinio. Tim, how's it going today, sir?
Great to talk today.
Absolutely, man. I am excited to dive in. We're going to be talking about the changing data landscape and what that means for marketers, both, regulatory changes that we're all kind of familiar with, looking at how we manage all that data and what do we do about this changing landscape. For some context, why you're the guy sharing about this today, give us a little bit of background on yourself, Tim, and what you and the Affinio team are up to these days.
Yeah, no, that's great. Appreciate the time, Logan. So my name's Tim Burke, CEO of Affinio. We built the company about 7 years ago, and just a little bit of background on Affinio itself. We're an augmented analytics platform, and we're built on a custom graph technology. And what that fundamentally means is that we analyze data in a little different way than many people. We're looking for specifically the connections in data and trying to identify those common behaviors and affinities across massive consumer data sets. And then once we unlock those, we're able to provide that into an insight layer that's easy to use and visualize so that the marketing teams can generate data-driven strategies and targeted activations ultimately. So helping teams do everything from content ideation and strategy to hyper-targeted and personalized content.
I love it. I always say, we're just swimming in data these days, but you hit on two things that are so key to actually making that actionable. How can we analyze it quickly, and how can we visualize it so that we can see the trends and then take appropriate action? So we wouldn't be able to talk about data without talking about some of the regulatory changes going on. Everyone, was up in arms, and my LinkedIn feed was full for about a month on GDPR last year.
Sure.
But tell us a little bit about some of the things that have changed over the last year or so for some context, and then we'll get into, what can marketers do about it. But I think that stage setting still a little bit appropriate, though I think everybody listening to this has heard of GDPR, at least a little bit.
Great. No, I think we live in really interesting times, right? It's with the things like GDPR, CCPA that are obviously emerging from a privacy perspective. I think consumers as a whole have a whole new perspective exactly of what kind of data is being collected on a regular basis, how that data is being used, and have opinions and want to know exactly how that data is being used. And as a result, that's transitioned and made massive changes in the marketplace relative to third-party data and third-party data exchanges, not the least of which, most recently are sort of Google's announcements of third-party cookie, not being sort of supported within the Chrome browser. So we've seen the trends, emerging, I would say, over the last couple of years. I think we will continue to see privacy be at the forefront. And ultimately, what that means to today's marketers, for me anyway, is that I look at it from that changing landscape of being, parties and groups and teams being able to rely heavily on sort of insights derived from segments and third-party data, or being able to use, oftentimes the ad targeting platforms of the likes of sort of Facebook and Google as sort of the foundational starting point for insights for marketing. Now we're transitioning into a phase where everybody has to collect first-party data that's obvious and clear, but more importantly, have to do more with that first-party data. And I think that's kind of the interesting trend that we're starting to see in the market. I tell people that, we've been storing and, enterprises have been storing first-party data for years. I think we're starting to see the gap in the marketplace isn't how you store and manage that data. It's how you make it meaningful and actionable and put insights and actionable insights in the fingertips of the entire organization. That becomes now the challenge that has to get addressed by the enterprise. And so I think it's interesting. I think the all the way down to the emergence of things like B2C brands that are trumping the old enterprises in a lot of their own businesses, and oftentimes it's about how they're leveraging their data faster and more nimble, and that translates into better strategies and winning in categories that haven't moved or haven't changed in a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about, kind of the first step when it comes to data management is where's it coming from? You talked a little bit about first party versus third party. One of the other challenges that you guys have been seeing, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, is how that data is being handled internally, because you have to be careful about who's touching that, what teams have access. It can create some real bottlenecks for marketing teams to be able to leverage that data, even when they've got it from appropriate places, right?
And that's good. That's absolutely correct. I would say that, some of the, the number one pain point we hear directly in market is the reliance on oftentimes sort of the data science or analyst teams who are simply just overwhelmed, right? I mean, they oftentimes have higher level data security and authorization. So they end up being the teams who can actually access the raw data and the PII that's, tends to sort of reside within the data warehouse or within the CRM. So they sort of become sort of this fun, the single point of contact into the raw data asset. And as a result, those teams are becoming backlogged with just requests from all across the enterprise. And marketing is just one of those groups, right? I mean, they're handling and managing requests from sales, from operations, from HR, everywhere. So I think the challenge is that with certainly the increased sensitivity around privacy, which is completely appropriate in terms of the concerns for the enterprise, the solution to date, or what I would deem the state of the art, is employing large data science teams to try to find insights and try to scale that within an organization. But I mean, the reality is that those teams simply aren't scalable. The data volumes are increasing almost faster than those teams can manage it. And not only that, the requests that are coming inbound to those teams is growing at similarly an exponential rate. And so for us, I think we're sort of hitting a tipping point that to manage privacy means, not allowing everybody in your organization to be able to reach private data and PII data, and that's the right decision. I think the approach that most organizations are trying to take to overcome that challenge is just simply not scalable now. And I think we're starting to see that come to light in a lot of organizations who are simply challenged by growing their data science or analyst teams fast enough to address the need within the market. And the default, unfortunately, within many of these enterprises and organizations then tends to be, those marketers and salespeople and those who actually, the advertisers who actually need those insights, are stuck sort of doing best guesses and, using traditional techniques and pulling on old static data from a survey from a year ago, right? I mean, it's pretty remarkable. What we have to default to is pretty rudimentary, given what the power of that data that resides sort of in those private data warehouses and in the private cloud could actually unlock for those people if it was feasible.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way those dynamics unfold and what the realities actually are, relying on old data, taking guesses. It's like we're stepping backwards quite a bit. You talked
Completely.
about the volume of data, the volume of requests that data science teams are seeing, not only from marketing, but from other functional areas like HR. And it seems like every time in these sorts of conversations, when it comes to, we've just got so much volume of information that needs to be processed, the conversation turns to AI. And in your opinion, Tim, there is some opportunity there, but also kind of proceed with caution. Tell us some of the ways you see teams leveraging AI effectively and where they're going, but not going in leveraging that sort of technology to solve this problem.
Well, I think it's sort of the holy grail, right? I mean, I think in market and certainly for the end users, the promise of AI is nothing new, right? We've heard about it. We've heard about the growth and emergence. There's been massive investments. Many of the biggest players in sort of the MarTech space are basically doing heavy investments in terms of their own applications in AI. Although I think some of that is simply to date has fallen short. And I think that's for a number of reasons. I think oftentimes the application of sort of generic models of AI just don't align with workflows. I think oftentimes the interpretation of the results are questionable, and therefore it's sort of people lose faith in emerging models fairly rapidly and have to get sort of comfortable with how they come, how those models are actually derived and what's valid and real information versus what isn't. But net, I think the marketers as a whole, I think are sort of waiting for the actual outcome that's been promised of the AI engine to come true. And I think we're starting to see some levels of that, but I would say it's still nascent. And I think it's probably growing, and emerging slower than many of us anticipated. I mean, I'm personally sort of blown away still to this day that we have autonomous vehicles who can navigate, any areas of North America with ease, except simple questions of a marketer about like who is our customer and what makes them unique goes unsolved within many organizations, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem to make sense that we've unlocked, some of the more challenging aspects, and yet the more trivial ones we can't leverage in the same way.
Today's growth story is about Active PDF, the leading global provider of server-side PDF automation and digital transformation tools. Active PDF gives teams the tools they need to create, convert, modify, view, extract, and automate data to and from PDF files. Active PDF relies on product trial signups for leads to drive new business, but they faced a challenge when low-quality signups were driving up the cost of product trials. To overcome their off-target lead generation and rising costs, they turned to Directive. Directive went to work optimizing visitor experience and centralizing high-intent keywords for Active PDF. With Directive's help, Active PDF tripled their conversion rates and quadrupled their trial signups, leading to one of their most successful quarters to date. If you want to learn how to drive this kind of growth, you need to check out Directive's Digital Marketing Course Institute. Step by step, click by click, Institute teaches you all of the skills you need to launch your own successful digital marketing campaigns. Sign up today at directiveconsulting.com/institute and get your first 4 lessons on us. Once again, that's directiveconsulting.com/institute to get 4 free lessons from the pros. All right, let's get back to the show.
You mentioned something there, Tim, the application of AI not fitting with workflows that need to happen in day-to-day environments. Can you give us maybe an example there of where that disconnect is? Maybe there are some folks listening to this that have had a similar experience, or they're thinking about this application and looking ahead to maybe they can foresee some roadblocks that you guys have encountered or some of your customers have encountered in that area that you mentioned there.
Yeah, I think the most significant challenge with respect to AI applications in most businesses is the fact that although we sort of envision AI as being this fully automated, just throw the data at the model and it'll solve kind of anything. For most cases, that's just not real. Models are built for certain specific purposes. And even in terms of our underlying graph technology, right? It's very good at doing very specific things like community detection, like anomaly detection, right? Like identifying common affinities between, and patterns across massive data sets. But it doesn't answer everything. Right. So anybody who sort of, is expecting, a single source or single code to basically unlock all answers across all data, I think is unreal. What I think you'll start to see emerging, and this is my expectation over the next 3 to 5 years, is you will start to see sort of very purposefully built AI solutions that basically address a specific workflow and a repeatable request, right? And so for us personally, the sort of number one request we hear from marketers, against sort of their consumer data is things like, find me common signals across certain buyer behaviors, right? What are sort of the data-driven behaviors that we can find, commonly across our entire customer base, and what do those segments look like, and how do they differ between segment to segment? So they're unlocking, to me, is the unlocking the power of AI at the foundation starts with unlocking those repeatable business requests and sort of aligning AI and specific algorithms to solve those repeatable requests. And that, I think, is going to be how you sort of see AI emerge within the marketing and advertising space as sort of it has been predicted to date.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, for marketers listening to this, you might want to take those promises of broad applications of AI, just dump everything in, as you were saying, and all sorts of insights will come out. Take those with a grain of salt. Instead, look for where are there very niche applications of AI to identify, repeatable patterns. Where are those things that we know kind of what needs to go in and what needs to come out, because, it's an equation, it's an algorithm and so you have to know what's the starting point, what's the end point. But oftentimes we can figure those out. We can, with some human intelligence, right? Let's talk about human intelligence for a little bit. The AI is only going to be, as smart as we train it to be. And there has to be a repeatable pattern so that we can train it. You talked a little bit earlier about kind of democratizing data science, training marketers, other functional roles as, quasi data scientists. Talk a little bit about that and other steps that you think teams can take, Tim, to address some of these problems that we've spent a good portion talking about. I want to give people some hope, some tactical takeaways. What can they do today? What are some of the steps they should be taking in light of all this?
Yeah, no, and I think it's first and foremost, I'll clarify that, for me, democratizing data science doesn't mean getting rid of the data science teams. I think the investment in those teams is super valuable. I actually think that they're sort of underutilized primarily because the 80-20 rule. We talking with a lot of these teams, we find that many of the 80% of their workload tends to be around simple requests that are these repeatable ones that should be being satisfied by an AI-based algorithm, right? I mean, and so when we speak to those teams, it tends to be more so around the fact of the AI engines and the opportunity that unlocks is essentially to offload from the data science teams those repeatable requests in a format that those can now be self-serve based on requests from the marketers who can get their own answers directly from the data through this algorithm and through the machine learning algorithms that are being built. Meanwhile, those data science teams can then be put to use against much, much harder, non-repeatable request type of work, right? So I think it's sort of unlocking and building efficiencies for that team is how we envision it. But for us, I think there's, the format for the marketers and the power that we're starting to see unlock the market, certainly a big focus for us ourselves is this type of affinity-based insight becomes some of the most compelling that a marketer can use at their fingertips, right? Those types of requests around, what's the difference between the person who purchased this product from us last week versus those who purchased this week? Our data show the change in pattern between those people who have churned versus those who we've retained, right? What are those affinities of those two different groups that we can then leverage? And oftentimes it's, for us, it's those signals at the core that, the marketer who has their own hypothesis, it's not, this isn't about sort of discovery, from raw data sets. As to your point, Logan, it's not about just throwing data and having it tell you the answer. Most marketers already have a thesis, and a hypothesis at the core in terms of what's going on, the means with which and the speed with which they can basically get insights and answers to those, that justify those hypotheses is what we see as the emerging opportunity, right? So at your fingertips, if they can make simple requests or make simple comparisons between, people who clicked on this campaign versus those who clicked on, previous campaign, those types of things become then the signals where optimization and, to your point, human intelligence can then get purely applied, right? And more effectively applied. And so we move away from simple guesswork and static personas and sort of static survey results to suddenly a far more dynamic enterprise where for us, and this is what we sort of think is the most compelling part, is that you're leveraging the creativity of the marketer because they themselves have become data-driven in this mechanism, right? And I think that's where the future sort of lies within the enterprise and within the sort of format and formula of what, the AI promise actually has always been.
Yeah, I love that. I am always kind of there's truth in the middle, typically sort of guy. And it's I picture this pendulum of, like you said, going back to our old ways and just okay, we've got to rely on static data. And the promise of AI is just, it's too far-fetched. That's on one end. The other is just believing that we can just dump data into AI applications without any rhyme or reason and just get back all the answers like a crystal ball. But what you're saying is, somewhere in the middle, if we tamper our expectations and we go into it with human creativity, then we can take some steps forward. We can advance in the way that we apply AI to the problems that we're trying to solve in marketing. I really like that. And that's kind of the visual that I have in my head as you were talking, Tim. As we wrap today, Tim, are there any other final thoughts, action steps that you want to share with listeners before we round out today's conversation?
I think just in closing, I think the opportunity ultimately is leveraging the brilliance and creativity of marketers at the core. That's what the power of a marketing team has always been. I think what we'll see emerge is sort of through AI and through rich visualization, and it is sort of just an enhancement to that creativity, and that's what I'm excited about.
I love it. Going back to that, artificial intelligence and human intelligence coming together, not just,
Completely.
hey, AI is going to replace us. Let's just, become mindless moving cogs. I love that. Well, Tim, this has been a great conversation. If anybody listening to this would like to learn more about what you and your team are up to, or just stay connected with you personally, what's the best way for them to take next steps there?
Yeah, certainly. You can reach me directly on my email. It is tim@affinio.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. It's T1MBURKE. So look forward to connecting with people.
I love it. Make it nice and easy. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Great. Thank you for the time.
I hate it when podcasts incessantly ask their listeners for reviews, but I get why they do it. Because reviews are enormously helpful when you're trying to grow a podcast audience. So here's what we decided to do. If you leave a review for B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts and email me a screenshot of the review to james@sweetfishmedia.com, I'll send you a signed copy of my new book, Content-Based Networking, How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. We get a review, you get a free book. We both win.